Playoff baseball is back. I'm Derek Van Riper, host of the Athletics Rates and Barrels podcast. Join Eno Saris,
Mr. Stats Guy,
Britt Chiroli,
how you like them apples,
Trevor May, and I as we dig deep into the key matchups and advanced stats driving the critical decisions throughout the postseason. From the first crack of the bat in the wild card round until the last pitch of the World Series, we have you covered. Check out the Rates and Barrels podcast every day during the postseason, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hockey is back on ice, and the Athletic Hockey Show has the game covered 4 days a week, all season long. Hear from the Athletics NHL writers and insiders Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Plus, keep up with the game's future stars on the Friday Prospect Series. Whether we're diving deep on one topic, discussing the latest news, or breaking down last night's OT winner, you can't miss a single episode. Listen to the Athletic Hockey Show wherever you get your podcasts.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and Toyota is back in Formula One after striking a technical partnership with the Haas team. But what impact will it have on the smallest squad on the grid, and how exactly will this deal work? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to explain all are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Mark Hughes. Well, Scott, Toyota's back. It'll be on the grid for the next race at Austin then.
Oh, you're going to incur the wrath of Akio Toyoda and his senior Toyota cohorts who quite endearingly but also naively stress that they don't want to see headlines like Toyota returns to F1, which someone didn't tell F1 itself that, because the Toyota returns headline was used on the official F1 website. But it is back in Formula One. It's back in a very specific capacity, but it's an official Toyota project. Toyota Gazoo Racing is a Toyota subsidiary. It's the competition arm, the R&D arm of Toyota. There's a massive Toyota-led desire to get experience for drivers and engineers in F1 again. I suspect it's lost out over the last decade or so, with Honda having such an increasingly successful F1 program and Toyota not having something like that. So it helps there. And crucially, in terms of being back on the grid from Austin, the logos are on the car. Initially, I thought it might only be a small TGR logo on the nose, but have you two seen the rear three-quarter images and the rear images of the rear wing?
Yeah.
It's got a proper Toyota Gazoo Racing rear wing. It's a bit like it's not on the, when you look at the car head on, it's not on it because it's not the title sponsor, but it's a little bit like when Honda got back properly on the Red Bulls and it just felt, oh, this is a bit more real now. So Toyota's got a little bit of that. So yeah, it is back on the grid and it is definitely back in F1, whatever the Toyota executives want you to believe.
Excellent. Well, we'll get into a bit more detail on that later. But Mark, you were around for Toyota's whole F1 stint from 2002 to 2009. Are you surprised to see it officially evolved in F1 again, even in this diminished form, should we say, so soon after that failure?
A little, I guess. Although it's not that soon now, is it? It feels recent to us, but it's 15 years ago.
Yeah, now I'm feeling old. It feels like
yeah. I mean, they're picking up many of the benefits of F1 without the big downsides of cost and commitment. So now that it's been announced, I guess it makes a lot of sense, but it's not something that, before these rumours started, it's not something that you would have thought, oh, this is obviously going to happen. It wasn't. It's a little bit left field. But great, yeah, it's great to see them back in a reduced capacity.
Well, let's get into the detail then, Scott. I really like this deal. I'm very impressed with it. So can you explain exactly how this technical partnership works, what it means for Haas's existing setup in terms of its deals with Ferrari, Dallara, and the impact on its own design facility?
Yeah, basically, we're going to have a Haas, Ferrari, Toyota, Dallara on the grid sooner rather than later, which is convoluted, to say the least. Interesting. I think it's the ultimate validation of something Ayao Komatsu, the Haas team principal, was saying earlier this year, which is that he felt when he took the job that the split locations was a big bottleneck for the team, that it just didn't work with the UK base and the stuff in Italy, the Maranello based design office, as you mentioned, and the Dallara work. But he found...
And the vast amounts of work being done in Canapolis.
Oh, of course, yes, in the team's official US headquarters. But he quickly realised that he felt there were actually structurally some problems and big communication issues inside the team. And actually that split location wasn't the major problem. And so, as I say, this is the ultimate validation of that, because they've added another country, another organisation, and another site into the mix. How it will work, basically, the Ferrari stuff stays the same. Haas stays as a Ferrari engine customer, and it will continue to take as many parts from Ferrari as the rules allow. That's mechanical parts. It's also the stuff that relates to the engine, so your gearbox and the rear end of the car. It could potentially do something of its own with Toyotas. The Cologne facility and know-how they have there would facilitate it, I think, but that's not on the cards right now. The Ferrari stuff stays the same. They'll even keep using the Ferrari wind tunnel. They won't be switching to the Cologne wind tunnel, which McLaren had used until very recently, and Andretti, for example, that their would-be F1 entries involve some work in the Cologne wind tunnel. It's all the old Toyota F1 stuff, isn't it, at Cologne, and it's still at a very high level. I think basically what the best way to understand it is that TGR will come in to complement the stuff that Dallara offers, and I think eventually come to replace Dallara in key areas. So not just design and low-level manufacturing. I think it could eventually evolve to be the actual chassis builder for the Haas team. So it does add another layer of complexity to F1's, I think, the most unique structure in F1, and certainly a structure that we've debated long and hard about whether or not it's fit for purpose in F1 anymore. But it fills some obvious gaps in Haas know-how, in terms of Haas facilities, and in terms of Haas personnel. And there are a couple of really good examples of that in terms of simulation and private testing, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment.
Mark, one of the things that was very clear in what the team said about this, and Ayao Komatsu, the team principal, has talked about it, is this is very much not just some magic bullet, oh, here's a load of performance we're going to bang on just by signing with Toyota. It's very clearly a longer-term thing. There's lots of opportunities for it to evolve in all sorts of ways. It seems like a really nice growth deal for Haas.
Yeah, it's exactly that, and I think it's also one of those nice deals where both parties get something quite obvious from it. Toyota gets cutting-edge F1 experience and gets to a place to train its engineers and its mechanics, and just to bring them up to Formula One levels, and also provides, as Scott touched on, a route for the young drivers and enables them to really get a young driver program going and have a potential supply of to Formula One in the future. And for Haas, it just gets around a lot of those limitations that it would have taken a huge amount of investment to acquire otherwise. And that level of investment, Gene Haas has never showed any sign of committing to. So, there's probably ways around. You probably got a much more, let's put it this way, you probably got a much more efficient way of spending us up to the cost cap limit as well, because you're plugging into something which already exists in Toyota in terms of their facilities. So yeah, Haas it goes a long way to giving Haas sort of big team facilities, not completely, but it goes a long way towards it, much more so than in the form they were existing. So I think, it's one of those sweet deals where both sides are getting a lot from it.
And the timeline of it is really interesting because, as you said, Ed, it's not something that's going to result in instant performance. Those stickers that will be on the car from Austin don't mean that there will be Toyota advancements for Haas this season, or maybe not even next season in real terms. There'll be other tangible benefits next year, in likely the creation of that testing program, the testing of previous cars that we often hear other teams do. Pretty much all, but not every team is engaged in that. Haas has been nowhere near having that kind of program. It hasn't had the cash because it's not something that Gene Haas wants to invest in. Crucially, it hasn't had the personnel. The Haas engineering team is basically what it takes trackside. There's not really any backup there. I think Komatsu described it as no reinforcement. So Toyota will basically be funding and helping staff a testing program, and similarly, there'll be a simulator from TGR installed at Banbury. It'll be the first UK on-site simulator that Haas will have. And that will give it a lot more simulation opportunity as well, because it does have access to the Maranello one that Ferrari uses, and it does do car development in that simulator and the simulation tools that Ferrari has. But in terms of driver work, in terms of weekend preparation, in terms of young drivers, in terms of, for example, next year they're going to have 2 new drivers, Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman. There's new engineering teams for them to get used to. Then that sort of stuff is really useful to have a simulator for. Haas couldn't have access to this, or didn't have access to this or use of this, because, again, that engineering team is it's threadbare, essentially. And Komatsu said, I'm sending them to every single race. I can't then ask them to do 10 weeks in Italy as well over the course of the year, because that's what would be needed to do all of that preparation. So those are the tangible benefits. And that long-term stuff is going to be faster than doing everything itself. To Mark's point about the level of investment that will be required for Haas to do all of this stuff on its own eventually. It's also the time taken, because you've got to source the hardware, you've got to install the hardware, you've got to recruit people, which, as we can see, can take 6, 12, 18 months depending on who it is that you're getting. TGR has all or most of that readily available, so it shortcuts that process quite a lot. And shortcuts is a dangerous word. Maybe better is probably sort of fast tracks it. It's a faster way of getting stuff that Haas would otherwise have to wait a really long time to get hold of and spend a load of money to get as well.
The one limitation being that obviously it doesn't own it, so that's the trade-off, I guess, in this scenario. But you're quite right. It's a great step for the team, because I must admit, I always saw how much of a limit there was in this team in terms of growth, because that step from going from what it is, as Komatsu has said, it's the smallest team in F1. It's got this unique constituent parts thing that no new team would be allowed in on this basis. They came in 2016 at a time when F1 was a little bit more keen to get new teams in. So you ended up with this one that was heavily dependent on the listed parts. But yeah, I hadn't really considered that you could bring in another entity like Toyota. It's been very, very cleverly done in that regard. I mean, it feels like...
that's a really good point, Ed, because I don't... when we talked about Haas before, and I mentioned at the start of my first answer, I think, about adding that other location and facility into the mix. With everything we've said about Haas, remember the stuff we were talking about right at the start of the year when Günther Steiner left, and we were questioning Gene Haas's kind of vision and appetite for this team and what it could have. I don't think any of us would ever have imagined part of the solution being adding something else into the mix. I genuinely, apart from the way that they're doing it with Toyota, which I think still, if you were doing it from scratch, this is clearly still not ideal. But what this is doing is basically just trying to help with the problems caused by the way the team had to exist in the first place and where it's been since then. I can't think of another way where you could inject another party into the mix and it actually help. This is the only thing I can think of. So hats off to them for working this out. And it sounds like, from what I've heard from Komatsu, but also from various Toyota representatives, it sounds like this initially started out as much more driver-led, much more driver-focused, because that's what the Toyota president was very keen on. But it very naturally evolved into something that had a way broader scope, purely because of just how almost perfect Haas and TGR can complement one another in terms of where they lack and what they offer.
Yeah, what is interesting is the way this will evolve, because Mark, if you look at it from the outside, obviously Dallara's still heavily involved, but this does feel like it will facilitate a reduction gradually over the next few years of the Dallara involvement in Haas.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. There's a little bit of overlap there currently as things are laid out, and I think with this partnership it would be much more cost efficient to get Toyota to be doing some of the stuff that Dallara currently does, although the scope of that has tailed off a little in recent years anyway. But yes, this is a more elegant solution.
Hockey is back on ice, and the Athletic Hockey Show has the game covered 4 days a week, all season long. Hear from the Athletics NHL writers and insiders Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Plus, keep up with the game's future stars on the Friday Prospect Series. Whether we're diving deep on one topic, discussing the latest news, or breaking down last night's OT winner, you can't miss a single episode. Listen to the Athletic Hockey Show wherever you get your podcasts.
We've talked about it from the Haas side, Scott, but let's look at it from the Toyota perspective. If this isn't really Toyota full-on back in F1, as you explained at the start, why exactly is it doing this?
Yeah, so I mentioned that they were keen for it to not be seen as Toyota returns to F1, and also that people might jump to the conclusion that Toyota's back, and that's not the case. As I said, it is, because it's a proper Toyota project, and there's lots of different gains that Toyota gets from it. You might remember late last year, I've got confused briefly there because of the timing of the Japanese Grand Prix changing. Late last year, at Suzuka, Ryo Hirakawa got announced as a McLaren development driver and eventually became one of McLaren's F1 reserves. And Hirakawa is a Toyota driver. And that announcement came as part of what McLaren team boss Andrea Stella talked about as basically like a knowledge sharing exercise between Toyota and McLaren. It wasn't going to be an engine deal. It wasn't going to be Toyota buying into the McLaren F1 team or anything like that. But there would be ways for them to work together and benefit. Toyota would be able to learn a little bit about Formula One and have one of its big prospects improve as a driver by getting involved in simulation activities. And he's been doing some private testing with McLaren as well. I think what it started out as with McLaren and what Toyota thought it could get out of a deal like that is effectively the genesis for what Haas has now. Toyota wants a way of being back in F1 without having a team or an engine program, because there's other benefits to gain. Mark was talking about it before with getting engineers and mechanics and drivers in the forefront of some kind of program. And, TGR is going to have the bulk of a lot of high-level F1 work to do, design-wise and manufacturing-wise, which could pay off if Toyota does want to come into F1 in the future. But it could also pay off for other TGR activities for Toyota itself, but also other clients that work at the TGR site in Cologne. So where the McLaren thing never really took off, I don't know if either of you ever heard it kind of evolving into anything more, but it's been dead silent from as far as I can tell, in terms of the only way it exists is basically Hirakawa's role and his occasional 2022 car testing. And so Toyota wanted more. That's where these conversations came from. And then, as I was kind of alluding to in the previous section, once those conversations started happening with Haas, it kind of realised how much this could snowball. And actually, there's loads of other mutual benefits as well. So I think Mark summed it up really nicely before when he said this is kind of it gets a lot of the benefits of being in F1 without actually properly paying for an F1 team or building an F1 engine.
What is interesting about this, Mark, is that although Toyota's very clear about what this isn't, you always get manufacturers who like to have a toe in the water, don't you? There's always the lowest level is just the constant design studies and little things that are going on in the background. Even it might just be one person somewhere in a manufacturer looking at Formula One, but this allows it to sharpen a lot of its tech, etc. So surely part of this objective is about the possibility down the line they could do more in Formula One because they've just updated their skills. It doesn't mean they're going that way for certain, but there'll certainly be some people within Toyota that like that idea. So it's interesting to see where this goes down the line, because it does create an avenue that would, if Toyota did want to come back into F1 in any way, shape or form, make it a little bit easier.
It would make it a lot easier, yes. And I don't think that's the plan. This is not the first step of a big master plan, but you never know where it might lead. And there are always individuals quite high up in the engineering groups who want to do F1, who recognise it for the engineering value. And, it could be as they get into more senior positions over the years, they are able to influence that direction more. And so, yes, as you say, this makes it a lot easier. But as you say, about stuff going on in the background, it's quite an interest. It might make an interesting piece one day to just look all these entities which are not in F1 but are still keeping up with everything that's happening in F1. I mean, it's Andretti is designs cars and does simulations of development parts and in the virtual world. When the Renault announcement was made that Viri was no longer going to be doing the F1 engine, it did make the point that there's going to be a little nucleus, a cell within there that's going to keep itself up to date with F1 technology and is going to be developing still. So, yeah, it's very beneficial to, if ever you do want to come back in to give yourself a sort of a rolling start rather than a standing start. And I think this would allow them to do that, but I don't think it necessarily means they are going to do that.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where it's more than a toe in the water. It's kind of like 1 foot in the door.
Wait, door, water? This is mixed metaphors, surely.
Rolling starts, standing
I'm
starts, you know.
I'm upgrading the metaphor. So
it's gone onto dry land.
Yes, exactly, and is half in the house but isn't quite, because obviously it's going to have a lot of benefits in terms of actually being in F1 from an engineering perspective, but there'll be commercial benefits as well. You know, as I said, they've got logos on the car, fairly prominent ones as well, with the back of the rear wing and stuff like that. There'll be Toyota personnel cropping up from time to time at races, and as simple as it sounds, once you're kind of in F1 a little bit and you start to sort of see what you can have, that does tend to win high-level executives over, because they get quite excited about being part of it, and then they want to be part of it more. The first time someone senior at Toyota looks at this and just goes, being in F1's great, but this isn't quite as successful as we think it could be, that will be when it starts to ramp up a little bit in terms of, okay, what more could we do here? And even if it doesn't go as far as team ownership or an engine program a few years down the line, because remember, Haas redid the Ferrari deal to the end of 2028, and Komatsu says that he said it will always be the foundation of Haas. Certainly in its current, if Haas is going to continue relying on other elements, the Ferrari deal probably will never change. The Ferrari deal will only change if and when Haas has an opportunity to become a proper works team, and then goes out and creates an entire new facility or something like that. Now, that could be with Toyota further down the line, but that's a big stretch for now. But at the moment, there's even little things like there's been no conversation at the moment about it becoming the title sponsor, for example. That's still MoneyGram. But Komatsu did make the point of saying that there is a natural point in a few years when the MoneyGram deal concludes, and they need to have a consideration about title sponsors. Well, that could be Toyota. Why couldn't it be Toyota Gazoo Racing or Toyota Gazoo Racing Haas or whatever? So the point is, by setting up what they've had, it requires enough investment, and it requires enough actual real commitment from Toyota people and TGR people that there's so much room for growth from here. And that is what makes it super interesting. It's a great thing for both parties now, but what it could lead to, I think we're going to have a bit of fun with that over the next couple of years, trying to imagine it.
It's interesting how the landscape has shifted in F1 to allow a manufacturer entity to have this kind of involvement, because you could almost argue, couldn't you, Mark, that the worst thing you can do is to just be a PU manufacturer, because you don't get any of the money, you don't get noticed so much. So this is kind of a great way to get involved in Formula One, more than just sticking an Alfa Romeo name above the door as they did with Sauber. They talked about technical exchange, but there was nothing on the F1 side. Whereas this is tangible and involved. So they've got the sticker and the visibility, they've got the recognition, but also people say, oh, actually, if Haas gets better a few years down the line as the Toyota involvement ramps up, they're going to say, well, that's Toyota playing that role with Haas, aren't they doing well? So it's I can't think of any manufacturer that has had this type of role in a Formula One team before.
No, this is a first. This is, as you say, way beyond the scope of just a sponsorship deal, a la Alfa Romeo and Sauber. But it's not a full-on commitment. It's a halfway house between those two things. And I think no one's really, until Toyota, has really thought about what are the benefits of that halfway house, because the benefits of being the sponsor but not having much input into how competitive the entity is, I would think is probably a little bit limited. But here they can have the visibility and also influence the direction that it's going and the way that the team's evolving. So I think it's quite nice, really. It'll certainly keep them engaged and focused and interested for a few years, I would think. And then, there may be a point where they say, right, well, what's the next stage of this evolution? Do we go our own separate ways, and do we Toyota become a works team and just cut Haas loose, or do we involve Haas in us becoming a works team, or do we say thank you very much? But I would imagine it's probably difficult to envisage them just doing this for 5 years and then stopping, because there will be a lot of benefits from it, and I think there will be a lot of enthusiasm generated within the company from it. So I think the direction of travel would be tending towards more rather than less.
It is a new kind of era style deal, and the two that it reminds me most of, more than the Alfa Romeo Sauber one, is the Red Bull Ford engine deal for 2026, but I think it's a lot more tangible than that, because the actual Ford technical involvement of the 2026 Red Bull engine, I think everybody's at least a little bit sceptical over how much of a contribution is really being made there. That feels more on the commercial side than the technical side. But the other one it reminds me of a little bit, it's not on the grid at the moment, it might never be, is Andretti and General Motors and Cadillac, where Andretti and Cadillac and GM are planning on using various different facilities. There's GM and Cadillac testing facilities in the US and development facilities that have stuff that Andretti doesn't have. And while the idea behind that is to ultimately become a works team with its own engine, blah, 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 that is different kind of brands coming together to sort of complement one another, produce strengths where each other is a weak, basically, and then have something that is reflective of the sum of its parts, basically. It's a little bit like that, but obviously this is much more real than both of those things, because first of all, this is a team that's actually on the grid, and you can immediately see where Toyota or TGR will be having an influence on the Haas project.
Yeah, and it's great that you've got something like this that has so many potential directions. And we should stress, there's not some master plan. A lot of these things aren't laid out and preordained. They're always ideas that are there in the minds of people. I'll see how it evolves. But yeah, I think this is something Toyota probably wouldn't have been keen on doing under in a previous F1 era, shall we say 10 years ago, because obviously they completely pulled away from Formula One and went and did other things. So yeah, I'm very, very interested to see how it works in that regard. Do we know, Scott, exactly who drove this in terms of which side created it? It's great for both sides, but do we know where the first seed of the idea came? And was that seed, if it came from the Toyota side, did Komatsu then have to really seize on that to try and make it into something bigger?
So I mentioned earlier that about this, the previous thing that Toyota had struck with McLaren, and Toyota, the Toyota president, has always been very keen to try and facilitate driver opportunities. Now, supposedly, Toyota said going into this year that he still wanted more opportunities to be found for Toyota to facilitate driver, engineer and mechanic opportunities in Formula One. So then TGR started looking around a little bit more. While it would be way too simplistic to say that they then went to the Japanese team boss on the Formula One grid. I believe that Komatsu had a previous. I think he knew Masaya Kaji, who is he's the general manager at Toyota Gazoo Racing. I'm pretty sure they had a pre-existing relationship. So I think like Komatsu, when he was on holiday in France with his family, went into the TGR garage at Le Mans. I'm pretty sure they then had him at Silverstone at Haas in return. So I think those two had started conversations at the start of this year. And what both of them say is that they both very quickly became aware there's actually a lot that we can do here. And they just seem to click. They gelled in a way, like I said about the McLaren stuff, that just hasn't evolved into anything. And it feels like this was a lot more natural. So, as always, when you've got someone who's, the ultimate figurehead of an organisation like Akio Toyoda is, I do find that you then tend to have those company executives say, this was all his idea, he really wanted to have this. So that might be a little bit convenient that they're saying this, but I think it came from the Toyota side in terms of exploring, and Komatsu was very, very keen to jump on it.
Well, that's the thing. That's the reason why I sort of asked the Komatsu role. It's less about, not so much about the fact he's Japanese, but just the fact that he's got this team that's got these limitations. And I can absolutely see him, because he's a very shrewd operator, very, very sharp. I can see him thinking, oh, hang on a minute, there's something we can really do here.
He said it's a no-brainer.
Exactly, yeah. Well, that's the thing.
He knew the benefit of this immediately.
Yeah, exactly. It's a fascinating deal from that perspective. Right, Mark, shall we look at Haas in the slightly wider sense now? Because it's had a good season. It's 7th in the championship right now, only 3 points behind RB, so could easily pick them off. Is this a team that's really turned a corner now under Ayao Komatsu?
It's a team that's doing well in extracting its potential, but its potential is limited in its current form. And I think we've seen in the team's performances in the past, when it's hit upon a particular stubborn problem, it can take a long time to sort of recover and identify it and recover from it. But it's inherently it's got enough expertise there to when the structural problems aren't getting in the way to produce a decent car, and we've seen that this year. It's quite often a Q3 car, and it's a team that is getting more from itself than some of its competitors, such as Sauber, or you could argue RB, and so maybe even Williams. And so you are seeing a slightly false picture, because if everybody was operating at their full 100% potential, they probably wouldn't be in the position where they can target Q3 qualifications and lower points finishes. But it's to their credit that they are doing so at the moment, and it's not their problem if other teams are struggling to extract their own potential. So I think that's where we see Haas at the minute as a very competent team, but an under-capitalised team. So I think, this is the obvious next step in its evolution.
Yeah, and obviously they've got a car that's been pretty consistent this year, as well as those points finished. I think Nico Hülkenberg's had 7 11th places in Grand Prix as well. So they're one of the more consistent performers in that midfield pack, which is always a good sign for car understanding, I would say. And obviously they did a lot of work on the tyre preparation and the long runs and that kind of thing in testing. In fact, that was pretty much all testing was for them, and that's paid off. And there were things technically they did with the car that solved the tyre problems from last year. So yeah, all going in the right direction.
I think it's, I've written this in a couple of places. I think it's quite good timing, or quite good symbolic timing, that this deal comes out as they go into the United States Grand Prix, and that Austin will be the first race that they have the Toyota logos on the car, because it shows just how far Haas has come in a short space of time, in 12 months since this race a year ago, because obviously this was the race where Haas brought that much vaunted, biggest ever upgrade in F1, the supposed Red Bull style upgrade, which seemed to be the result of Gene Haas demanding something much more than the team was capable of, and Günther Steiner, a weary Günther Steiner by that point, eventually basically relenting and saying, okay, Gene, if you want a car that looks like a Red Bull because you think it will go like a Red Bull, that's what I'll tell the team to do. Steiner also motivated to interfere with the development plan because the Haas technical team, as it was at the time, hadn't made any progress with its original concept. And obviously that all flopped. It didn't work. It was probably never really going to work. And Komatsu has been a really vocal opponent to that entire strategy. I think going back to the scene of that, with Toyota logos on the car in a much more competitive season, aiming for what will be their best championship finish since their best ever season in 2018, I think it's quite neatly symbolic, isn't it, of that 12-month journey.
And also very positive, because it was looking pretty bleak for Haas, wasn't it? Remember when Steiner left and the difficulties of investment, it seemed like Gene Haas was very disengaged. We were quite critical and concerned about the direction of the team. So I don't know about you, Mark. I'm slightly surprised by how well they've done, not because of any lack of faith in Ayao Komatsu, far from it. He's a very accomplished individual, but it just seems like maybe that change from the Steiner era to the next era was the necessary step for this team. He was so integral in terms of the team even existing in the first place and doing what it did. But sometimes you do just need a next step, a change, and you can create a next chapter, because that certainly seems to have been the direction over the past 10 months or so for Haas.
Yeah, I think they'd got themselves into a bit of a knot in terms of how the relationship was working between Gene and Günther had become increasingly frustrated because he couldn't see a way forward of taking the team to the next level, and Gene was not interested in committing any further than he already had, and he already plowed millions in, and he considered that quite enough. So because of that impasse, I think it really did require a change, and it would have been very easy for Komatsu to have taken over that role and just found exactly the same problems as Gunter had and just been buried by them. But he hasn't. He's been very proactive, and he already had his own very clear ideas about what he felt the limitations were, and obviously he was super keen to implement them. And it's been transformational in terms of the team's competitiveness, and that with a bit of reorganization within the technical department as well. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where you don't know just how different it could be with just the smallest couple of changes, and we got to find out. So yeah, it's been a feel-good story, really.
The main bit of context that needs to be remembered when assessing Haas's 2024 is that while it's undoubtedly done a better job and Komatsu has improved things in key areas, it has been helped massively by other teams. And Komatsu himself acknowledges this. He still believes they should finish last in the championship this year. And I agree with him. They're still the smallest team and they were last year. And in his words, I interviewed him in the middle of the season, and he said that's why he was predicting being at the back for this year, because he can't count on other teams messing up. But that is what has happened. Williams shot themselves in the foot with a probably necessary but very badly managed overhaul in how they do the car and everything over the winter, and they've been paying the price ever since, plus some crashes early in the year. So that's one team picked off. Obviously, Alpine slumped massively, huge problems there. That's the Renault Works team. Haas has got no business beating the Renault Works team, but it is. It's also it's demolishing the future Audi Works team in Sauber, which has just got itself into all kinds of trouble. Again, I don't think that's a team that Haas should be beating in the interim, and it's looking like it might be able to pick off the second Red Bull team as well. So it's massively overachieving, which isn't because everybody's doing a great job and Haas is somehow getting 120% out of everything that it has to offer. It's just Haas is much closer again to being at 100% of what the Haas team is capable of, and others have dropped the ball. It doesn't take away from what Haas is achieving this year, but the team itself recognises that is crucial context to consider. And I sincerely believe that getting Gene Haas to understand that has probably been one of Komatsu's big successes this year, because I was still hearing stories through this year that Gene, for whatever reason, still felt the team could be achieving even more, whereas now it feels like the conversation's changing slightly to, right, Ayao, what do we need? If I want this team to finish on the podium, what does it actually need? And it's almost like a recognition that more does need to be put in. But because they've been achieving more with what, as Mark was saying, Gene's already invested, Gene is now open to that extra investment again. It does feel like there has been a key change in the dynamic there.
And there's various things coming. They've got their new motorhome coming next year that's going to be a bigger facility that's going to help them a bit. That was something that there was a bit of dispute about in the past within the team, and motorhomes may not sound like they make the car go faster, but they're very important when it comes to hosting guests and sponsors, and the more sponsorship you've got, the more money you've got, and the faster you can go. So that's very positive. But Mark, looking at this team as a whole, with Haas's evolving setup, how much do you think its performance potential is increased by this? And I appreciate that's a slightly tricky question, given, as we discussed earlier, there's still a lot to be decided over the next 18 months, couple of years, in terms of how much Toyota does. But how much do you think that ceiling's been raised?
The medium to long term, it's been raised significantly. But I think, if we're looking at the next season, maybe next 2 seasons, if they can just continue the momentum that they've established this year, they'd be doing well. The tricky bit for them is going to be the new regulations of 26, and that might be an area where they fall down, because it's obviously everything's starting from scratch, and the big teams tend to flourish better in those early days of a regulation change. So that would be the next tricky spot for it. But it's even that will be a good learning process, because with Toyota working away in the background, going through the development of that. Yeah, I think generally it's just going to be a bit surer-footed in terms of its progress through from one season to the next. But I think looking at its competitive prospects for the next couple of years, they haven't significantly changed, I'd say.
No, I think you're still looking at a team that should, if everybody gets 100% out of their potential, finish last in the next couple of seasons. I think their natural adversary is the second Red Bull team, because it's a bit similar in that it's got split locations and it is a customer and all of that, but the Haas one is still fractionally more limited. And then beyond that, it's your sort of second tier customer teams, Alpine, Williams, because as I say, like Sauber as the Audi works team should be clear of this group, but it's got so many problems that it isn't. But that's the kind of nucleus of teams that Haas can consider itself part of. Right now, I firmly believe that in terms of potential, there is a gap between Haas and the rest of the teams. It might not be massive, but it's a couple of attempts. Let's say a notional couple of attempts that they are behind the next gaggle of teams. What this deal does over the medium term, I think, is put them on a par with Red Bull's second team, maybe with the lesser customers that Alpine will be and Williams will be, just because of the nature of their arrangements. But if you're on a par with, if you're in a group of 3 or 4 teams in terms of potential, let's say, and you're a tenth or 2 tenths off in terms of maximum potential, and then an even bigger cluster of teams, whether that is Audi's works team, Aston Martin, whoever, suddenly you're an organisation that isn't punching above its weight just to score points and to see if others screw up so that you can not finish last in the championship. You become a team that actually can exist long-term sustainably in the F1 midfield and actually afford yourself to have grander ambitions. Because right now it's a lovely idea for Haas to score a podium, and they might do it just because of the job that they're doing and the jobs that others are doing. But I don't think they can aim for that on merit at the moment, because they actually shouldn't really be anywhere near a podium, and they're not if everybody absolutely nails it.
Yeah, and I think if we're looking for a case study as to where this new thing may be useful in the immediate term, you could probably look at something like aeroelasticity, which is becoming the big battleground between the top teams as they try to resolve this conflict between low-speed understeer and high-speed oversteer that these regulations engender. This is a technology that Haas have been, and all the smaller teams have been left behind on very quickly, because it's developed at quite a rate in the second half of this season. That's something that they couldn't really hope to properly research and develop on their own, but that might be an area that Toyota could help in quite quickly.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line is there's a lot of things where prior to this deal, Haas might have thought, it'd be interesting to go down this line and look into that, and then it's just a hard no. It's like, well, we've got no way of doing that. Now at least they've got a partner there who is worth having a discussion with. Can we do this? Can we do that? So I think that does open up many, many pathways in that regard. Although there's still going to be limitations, it's still going to be taking as many transferable components from Ferrari as possible. Ayao Komatsu stressed that there's no plan to do their own gearbox or suspension or anything. So there's a fair dependency on Ferrari in that regard, as Scott said earlier. It's always going to be a key part of the team. But yeah, it's just gloriously open-ended, this deal, in a very, very good way. So I think it's going to be great to track how this goes over the next couple of years, and very encouraging that the future for Haas, as the past 10 months has shown, isn't quite as bleak as maybe it appeared to be. Well, thanks to Scott and Mark for your insight on this topic. We're just a week away from the season getting going again for the final push, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.